Sometimes you're going to want to manipulate data or provide feedback to users interacting with your form without there necessarily being a submission process between that interaction and that feedback. This is a good use of custom JavaScript with your forms. And we're going to talk specifically about using custom JavaScript with Gravity Forms using the Code Chest add-on from Gravity Wiz. And we'll talk about some jQuery as well and take a look at documentation from both Gravity Forms and jQuery in order to get this done. So let's take a look at my example first, and then we'll talk about how we build it. So in my example, I have a form that asks users for their favorite color, favorite ice cream, favorite car make. And then I also have a field for favorites combined, and then a message. So let's just run through the questions here and you'll see how the form works. So we'll take a look at favorite color. We'll select red, favorite ice cream, mint chocolate chip, and then favorite car make is going to be Jeep. So you'll probably noted a couple things. One is that every time I made a selection, this favorites combined updated to show me the selections separated by a semicolon. The second thing you noticed is that once all three selections were made, a message displayed saying, one day we'll hop in your red Jeep, grab some mint chocolate chip ice cream, and go for a drive. So if we change any of these options, both of those fields update to reflect the change. And then that custom message only displays when all three options are selected. We're doing this using custom JavaScript, jQuery specifically, saved in the code chest for the form. So Code Chest is a Gravity Forms community add-on. You can find information about it on the Gravity Forms website that will actually link you to the Gravity Wiz website, the developer of the plugin. This is a free plugin. In order to download it, you will need to give them your email address. But if you wanted to take a look at some of the other great offerings from Gravity Wiz, I highly recommend just sort of searching through their site. And then Gravity Perks is a great paid plugin that adds a lot of features to your Gravity Forms. So that is definitely worth checking out. So Code Chest is a plugin that once installed, you will get this option within your form. So if we take a look at forms and then go to form settings, you'll note that Code Chest is on the left-hand side here, but also whenever you are editing a form, you can get to it by going to settings and then Code Chest. And so in this editor here is where we are actually going to add our JavaScript. Code Chest is by no means the only way to add custom JavaScript or a custom CSS to your Gravity Forms. The benefit here, though, is that instead of having external files that might be like saved in custom plugins on your website and whatnot, which are great if your code is specifically complicated or refactored into multiple files, saving your JavaScript or CSS using Code Chest, that code will follow the form no matter if you duplicate the form or export the form and import it into another website. That code is saved with the form. So it's basically saving that code into your WordPress database for that form, which is nice to have. So it's probably best for sort of limited simple cases, although, I mean, you're not necessarily limited. It's just, it can get unwieldy if the code gets super long. So just that caveat. I know that there are other ways of doing this, but those are the benefits of doing it this way. So before we get started, let's talk about how this form is set up. So under favorite color and appearance, you'll note that I have some custom CSS classes here. So one of the classes is specifically talking about, what the form is. So this is the color form. And then we have this class called trigger field. And if we go into each of these fields, so here's favorite ice cream, and we see that we're using the ice cream class, and then trigger field again. Favorite car make, we see that we use car make as a class, and then trigger field as a class. So all three of these select fields have a class assigned to it of trigger field. And that's going to be important when we're looking at the code. And then under favorites combined, you'll see that I have combined as its class and then message as its class. These classes do nothing to change the appearance of these fields. However, using jQuery or JavaScript in general, you can, this is how we're going to reference these fields. So instead of like trying to find the field ID and reference it that way, we're just going to reference it by field class, which is super easy to do in JavaScript or specifically in jQuery. Going into our tutorial form here, we'll note that if we make a selection, nothing happens. And so we're going to work on fixing that. But we're going to take a look at our developer tools and then specifically look at how fields are structured in Gravity Forms. And this will help us understand how our jQuery is going to be written. So I selected this select field, but you'll note that our class does not show up in the select field. So how Gravity Forms writes its forms, the markup, is that we're wrapped in a div called gField. And in that div is our field. So we've got color here, and then we've got trigger field here. So when we are referencing this field in jQuery, we are going to say, trigger field and then select field. And that's going to help us reference this select field or any of these fields. When we take a look at this input field here, we'll note that this is an input, not a select, but we'll reference this using combined. So here's our combined class, and then input. And then under message, this is a text area, and its class is message. So it's going to be message and then text area. So that's how we're going to reference those fields in our code. All right. So now that we have sort of walked through what that looks like, we're going to go into our favorites and then into our form and then hit code chest. And then we're going to start writing some JavaScript. Probably one of the most challenging aspects of adding the custom JavaScript to Gravity Forms is knowing exactly where to start. Basically, we want our code to run when the form is loaded. That's probably going to be your most common use case. So if we hop over into the Gravity Forms documentation, we'll note that we have an area for JavaScript hooks. And then we have this hook called gform post render. And then the description basically says that this can be used to initialize script when the form loads. So this is probably going to be your most commonly used hook when adding JavaScript to your forms. And so what we want to do is just grab this example. And we're going to go back into our JavaScript editor here, and we're just going to paste it. We're going to get rid of this do something. So that's going to be our start. So basically this is saying, hey, when the form loads, then run this code. So we don't want this code running any other time. This is especially important if you are taking a look at current form values when they load. So this is just a good place to start. All right, so I already have my code written, but I didn't want to just paste it in. I wanted to run through it line by line and explain what's going on here. So, all right, including my documentation. So when a select field with a class of trigger field is changed, so remember each one of those select fields has a class of trigger field assigned to it. So what we're looking for is when one of those fields change, do this thing. So when that happens, we are going to first initiate an empty array called favorites. I'm sorry, I did this last time when I was running this too. The first thing we're going to do is start a loop through those fields. So what we've done here is we're calling jQuery and we're saying for every trigger field that is a select field, whenever they change, do this thing. Okay? So we are looking for a change in our select fields that have the class of trigger fields or trigger field. And then what we're going to do is create an empty array called favorites. And that's where we are going to save the selected options. And then we are going to loop through each field. So we're going to do that using jQuery as well. And so walking through this, we're calling jQuery, and then for every select field that is within a trigger field container, for each of them, do this thing, and this thing is defined here. And then if the field has a value, add it to the favorites array. So we want to check if the field has a value. So we're going to use jQuery for that as well. And in if statements, we're going to say if jQuery this. So this is a special token here that basically says we are within a loop. And this refers to the item being looped. So remember, there's 3 fields, and we're going to loop through each of those fields. So whatever field that it's currently on, this is going to represent. So this dot value, so this is going to be the current value of that field. And if it is not equal to basically nothing, so if it does not have a value, or if it is not blank, I should say, then we are going to use the push method here for the favorites array. So favorites.push, and push is just adding data to the array. jQuery this dot val, so we're pulling the value of the current field within the loop. We're adding it to the favorites array. All right, so that's the end of that if statement, and then that will be the end of the loop. So that's all we're doing in that loop. All right. So now what we need to do, once we have all of the selected favorites in an array, we want to set value. We want to set the value of field with class combined to a string with values of the favorites array, replacing commas with semicolons. So remember, we had that the combined value had each value selected, and then semicolons between them. So that's what we're going to do now. So the first thing we're going to do is replace our favorites array with a favorites variable, favorites string, using the toString method of the favorites array. So basically this toString is going to represent the favorites array as a string separated by commas. So at this point, favorites is going to be a string of those values separated by commas. But I specifically wanted semicolons because that's what we need for Salesforce multi-select pick lists. That may not be your use case, but that was mine. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the replace method. And basically, we're going to use, this is basically saying, look for every comma globally within the string and replace it with a semicolon. So now at this point, favorites is going to be the list of those values. And instead of those values being separated by a comma, which toString will give us, they're now going to be replaced by a semicolon. And then we're going to use jQuery to write that to the field. So now we're targeting the field, the input field within the combined field within the input field within the container dot combine. So that dot combine class field, we're setting its value now. So that dot val favorites is saying take this favorites that we created and set the field value using that variable. And then this dot change is just basically telling the DOM that like this changed. So if there's any other things that should happen if that field changes, this dot change at the end will trigger it. It's kind of best practice as I've been working with Gravity Forms to do that, and maybe just best practice in general. So at this point, that field is going to be going to have its correct value. All right, so now what do we need to do? Well, now we want to create a custom message by setting variables based on selected options. Great. The only thing I don't like about this editor is that when you hit enter after creating a comment, it assumes you're going to continue to write comments, which I don't like. Okay, so now I'm going to paste in a block of code here. Because all we're doing is setting variables. Okay. So we're going to set this color variable. We're going to use jQuery. We're pulling that's the value of the select field within the color class to color. Same thing with ice cream. So color is now going to be that value. Ice cream will be that value. And then a little bit differently, we're going to get the label and value for CarMake. So the label's a little bit different. So we're CarMake class select, specifically looking at the option within that select field that is selected, dot text. And then we're also pulling the value here. Why are we doing this? Well, car makes are capitalized and our labels are capitalized, but our values are lowercase. And so in order to create that custom message and have the car make capitalized, I just wanted to pull the label. So that's why we're doing it both ways. And we're pulling the value because we want to make sure that the field has a value. All right. So moving forward, so we're only going to create custom message if all fields have a value. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a message variable here that is blank. And then we're going to check for required values. So our if statement is basically saying if color, ice cream, and car make values are all not equal to blank. So all of them have to have a value in order for this message variable to be populated with a custom message. And what we're going to do then is use a template string to create that message. Okay. So one day we will hop in so here's how we're populating color. Here's how we're populating car make label. Here's how we're populating ice cream. I just recently, and I know that it's been since it's been like 10 years since ES6 template strings were made available to us. So this is a nice, easy way of templating data within text. One of the things you want to definitely watch out for is that this is a backtick, not a regular single quote, in order to create that templating. So it will not work if you use a single quote. So just be aware of that. And then I also noticed that in my example, I was missing a comma. So we're going to add that comma there. All right. So there we're setting our message. And then we are going to then set our message field with the custom message. And again, we're using jQuery to target that field. And again, we don't want this to be comments. And then message, so the text area within that message class, setting the value of message, which we have set here, and then also saying .change just in case there's anything that needs to be triggered if that field changes. All right. And then actually that is a mistake in my code. Technically, I don't need that line there. So let's back this up. And this is a good example. So I had gone through a couple iterations of this, but I actually wanted to set this outside of this if statement. I wanted to set it outside of the if statement because so instead of saying like if every field has a value, then create the custom message and then write the field, instead of then also having like an else and then creating a blank message, What we're doing is just setting a blank message when the script runs. So by default, the message is blank. And then only if each field has a value, write the message. And then outside of the if statement, updating the field value. So that no matter what, it's either that field is going to be set to the blank message or it's going to be set to the custom message here if those fields have a value. So it's just a little bit of a more streamlined way of writing your code rather than saying like if else. We're just setting what the sort of default is and then setting the field change outside of the if, because that field is going to get updated regardless. So if there are no values, that field is going to be blank. If there is a value, it's going to be the custom message. All right. So that is all of the code. I sometimes really like to just have this code, instead of like editing within the browser, I oftentimes will throw it into my IDE. So in this specific, it's Visual Studio. To make my changes and even like save a local file just in case something happens. Plus, if I had any feedback for the plugin developers on this, is that these don't appear to be expandable, so I can't drag it down and make full use of my screen. Whereas my IDE, I have a bit more space to work. So that's a tip that I would give to you, is to maybe use a code editor or IDE outside of this. Not only will that allow you to have like a saved version locally, but will just give you more room to work. All right, so if I have copied and pasted everything over that needs to come over, I'm not seeing any errors here. And then I hit save settings and then go to our form. It should work. So now let's go to select our color, red. So far, so good. We've got red and combined. We're going to go mint chocolate chip. There we go. Car make Jeep. And there is our message, including our comma there that is fixed from the example. And then if I unselect one, that message should go away. So there you go. That's how to add custom JavaScript. And I hope you learned something about not only adding the JavaScript, but maybe a little bit something about how Gravity forms are structured, a little bit something about jQuery. And so when you have a use case comes up where you need to add some custom feedback or manipulate data based on user interaction on your form, hopefully that provides you a good place to start to figure out how to code your solution.